Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, April the 29th, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. Remember, if you're here with us, you have a priority to suggest topics of your interest to be discussed live. It doesn't need to be legal stuff. It could be anything related to either Brazil or Portugal. With that said, let's take a look at the news. Let's see what's going on in Brazil. And here we have a recurring topic. This time is not about Banco Master or Banking Master. Now it's still about the Brazilian Supreme Court. There is this gentleman, Messias, and he is being vetted by the Brazilian Senate to be a new justice in the Supreme Court, in the Brazilian Supreme Court. And his name is Messias. Like, he has a very interesting background. He is evangelical or a Protestant, and like he represents a really large or growing segment of the Brazilian population. Brazil, as you probably know, it was mostly Catholic, for most of its history. And then in the last probably 40 years, the evangelicals, they've been picking up in terms of growth. And nowadays, it's a large segment of the Brazilian population. And Messias, he is an evangelical. He says very clearly that he is against abortion and other left-leaning policies. Now, interesting enough, and then maybe this is a hallmark of Brazil, Brazil has so many inconsistencies from a first sight. He is being referred by President Lula, right? So President Lula, who is like the leader of the left leaning, politics in Brazil, he is the one referring Messias to the Brazilian Supreme Court. And it's very interesting because right now, President Lula, he's not really strong in terms of broad support by either the population or, the politician class. But by referring this gentleman, he is able to have someone from his trust, into the Brazilian Supreme Court, at the same time that he is pleasing a large segment of the Brazilian population. So very typical of President Lula, very skillful in terms of politics, and that's what you see over here. Let's see what else we have. Again, if you take a look here at, this much of my screen on Estadão newspaper is a major headline about fitness. And we discussed, I don't recall if it was on Sunday or last Wednesday, how important it is for Brazilians, to be fit, to be in good shape, and to look good. So, as you can see, the headline for, this training, gym stuff is as big as it is like the main headline for, this referral for the Brazilian Supreme Court. It's very interesting. And it is something recurring that you see, across the different newspapers and also other sources of media. Another very interesting headline, this one is about the United States. And for the first time in 200 years, the United States is receiving less than 10% of the Brazil exports. So Brazil is exporting less than 10% in total to the United States. And that's the first time in 200 years, okay? And the reading here is that the tariffs applied by President Trump have driven Brazilian exporters to seek other markets outside of the United States, not only because of the tariffs, but especially for the concern that something else could happen in the near future. So there is some talk in the United States about additional tariffs or tweaking and this and that. And because, as you may imagine, the exporting cycle is like, very long and difficult for you to forecast or to work with unless you have a good forecast of the conditions. Brazilian exporters are looking to other markets, such as you may tell, like China, Asia, like Europe, and so on. Like the United States has been a preferred destination. Like U.S. companies, U.S. buyers, they are typically faster to reach a decision. They are typically more generous in terms of how much they are going to pay for a product. But now the uncertainty component is kind of hurting the U.S. Perspectives in terms of buying Brazilian products, right? Like really interesting, right? And I completely get like what President Trump was trying to do. Like to be honest, Brazil has a very strong policy of applying tariffs to other countries. So it's not like, Brazil doesn't do exactly the same thing that the US was doing. But, one way or the other, it looks like President Trump's tariff policy for Brazil has backfired, right? There is no other way to say what was the result of the tariff policy when it comes to Brazil exports. And yes, so that's it for the news. Let's take a look at our ad for Brazil. Remax Nomad States. If you're looking for property in Brazil, that's typically our referral for a real estate agency. They are based in Rio de Janeiro, but they have been working very efficiently in different states and different cities in Brazil, having served many of our clients. And there you go. If you want to take a screenshot, go ahead so we can go back to our chat window and see if there are any participations. Let's take a look and see. We have Aaron. Good to see you, Aaron. Aaron is asking, is there a legal way to barter transfer a fully paid off-plan undelivered property as part of purchasing another property without incurring high taxes? Would sellers consider accepting a trade? Aaron, so it is possible sometimes. It really depends on the stage in which you are. So let's say if you just have a purchase agreement for an off-plan and the seller, like in the main contract, allows the reassignment of rights, potentially you could use this property as you could either sell to a third party before the registration at the cartório, or you could use it as a credit, right? Like if you find another seller willing to receive this property as part of the payment. But it really depends. Like I remember some situations in which the off-plan property was sold without like tax consequences, and there was another one in which the registry said, "Listen, I can see that there was an assignment, and guess what? We're gonna charge you double ITBI, which is the property transfer tax." And then I remember that seller decided to sue the registry because there was a legal thesis that they wouldn't have to pay that particular tax twice. But guess what? Like, I mean, whenever you're suing a registry, right? Whenever you're using like the Brazilian judiciary, you basically let go of any reasonable timelines, right? So for that case, in particular, our client, he decided to buy something else. I mean, just because there was no way for us to tell how long it would take for the seller to be able to successfully sue the registry to avoid the double taxation. Okay, Aaron. So it really depends on the city, the market, the specifics of the paperwork. Um, if sellers would consider accepting a trade, it's just like one of those questions related to self-finance, like when sellers are self-financing a property, usually like in Santa Catarina, right? Because that's not common at all outside of Santa Catarina. But it's gonna depend on how bad the seller needs to sell the property to you. Okay, so if it is like a Copacabana, if it is like I don't know, Leblon, if it is Ipanema, I would say most of the sellers would not consider another property as part of the payment. But if we're talking, let's say, northeast of Brazil, then chances would be much higher, right? It could be Natal, it could be Fortaleza, it could be Salvador, it could be Recife. Those markets, they are not as favorable to the sellers, and therefore you have a more leeway to negotiate and to offer a property as part of the payment. But the offering a property as part of the payment is not unusual at all in the Brazilian market. So it is not something that people would look at it surprised, right? And at least not like in Rio de Janeiro, right? Like Rio de Janeiro, particularly the south zone of Rio de Janeiro, is a very unique market. And for that market, people wouldn't probably even reply to you unless it was a steal, right? Let's say it's also going to depend on how much you're asking as a credit for your property. So let's say if the property is worth 500,000 and you're asking 400,000, then of course the seller may have a different reaction than if you're just asking 500 for a 500 property. And it also depends on the market. But interesting question, Aaron. Tora, boa tarde, Tora. Boa tarde, Senhor Oliveira. May I work with Patrick to set up a Brazilian bank account? Yes, Tora. So Patrick, he would refer you like to another colleague of ours, and he would he would help you set up the bank account, okay? But Patrick is like your now. Patrick, let me. Are you working on the transaction? Now I remember. Like you're. I just need to remember what track you're working on. Now I remember. Like if you're working with Patrick, I thought it was a real estate case, but now I remember it is not. So for your track, yes, just talk to Patrick. Say, Patrick, I need help setting up a Brazilian bank account. A Brazilian bank account is not part of the immigration journey, right? So he's probably going to refer you back to Justin. Justin, she's going to present you like a proposal to assist with the Brazilian bank account. And then once this is taken care, she's going to send you to the person who's in charge of setting up, of helping you with setting up a Brazilian bank account. All right, Tora? Thank you for asking. Let's see what else we have over here. All right. Let's take a look at our backlog. Yes, this question was answered before, but I can certainly answer. Like I have an older child, right? Can I have this child, getting a residency through my blah, blah, blah process, right? So that could be a question for someone who's securing the retirement residency in Brazil, who's securing, like the real estate investor residency, any of those types of residency. And typically the answer is going to say no, unless it is a child who's dependent on you for a clear and exceptional reason. So let's say if you have a disabled child, in this case, the Brazilian immigration is going to be typically We can never guarantee an outcome, but you will be typically amenable to allowing your disabled child to stay with you even though the child is older than 18 years old. Now, if you have a healthy child of, I don't know, 25, 27 years old, this child is not gonna be entitled to family reunification under most of the residencies in Brazil. The disabled exception could also apply to parents. Typically, Brazil is not going to extend residency to the parents of children unless the children were born in Brazil, right? Because one of the main tracks for permanent residency in Brazil is like when you have a child in Brazil, guess what? Parents are going to qualify most of the time, depending on additional requirements. But based on the childbirth in Brazil, they have a shot at the residency, at the permanent residency in Brazil. So that's more like an exception. But for everything else, like you cannot bring your parents to Brazil because you bought real estate or because you got a digital nomad. Now, the exception, again, it's going to be when you have a parent relying on you. So let's say if you are the caretaker of your father or of your mother, chances are the Brazilian immigration would have an exception for you to bring such parent to Brazil with you. And of course, you're going to need to provide robust documentation to make it clear to the Brazilian immigration that yes, you should be able to bring your parent to Brazil so you can continue to take care of them. All right, let's see what else we have. Sean, regarding trade, I think the idea was to have more balanced trade with countries, but the U.S. already sells more things to Brazil than it buys from Brazil, so didn't seem to make sense at face value. That's an interesting point, Sean. Indeed, like Brazil sells a lot of stuff to Brazil. The U.S. sells naturally like technology. You have all the internet companies based in Brazil. Hardware, software, high technology products. They come to Brazil a lot, right? So it's an interesting point, and it would be interesting to check how much of our imports are coming from the United States. I would assume it's going to be substantially more than 10% of our imports, and there is also a cultural component that I frequently share over here. Like Brazilians, they absolutely, in general, they love the U.S. Even when they complain about the U.S., even when they badmouth the U.S. Whenever you check, for instance, social media and you see something, you're gonna see, Brazilians aggravated by a bunch of things that happen for policies of the United States. There was, just to, maybe cause some polemic here in our live stream, there was a very famous Brazilian actor, and he was actually, participating in the Oscar ceremonies. I don't recall his name. Like, he's a very famous face for us Brazilians, of course. And I think it was Wagner Moura, if I'm not mistaken. It could be someone else. There are a couple of brothers, if I'm not mistaken. They look alike. I don't know exactly his name, but this Brazilian actor, he's very critical of the United States. He's very critical of the United States. He's very aligned with the left side of the wing in Brazil. Very interesting. Just like many people point out, his choice of place to be living is the United States, right? So he's living in the United States. He typically chooses to live in very, how can I say, very typical American cities, states, to live like the American dream, if you will. And at the same time, he's criticizing the United States, right? So here the distinction for me is like, if you are from the United States and you live in the United States, it does not matter your side of the aisle. It doesn't matter where you are in the spectrum. You are not only welcome, but you are, I think it's even like almost like an obligation for you to criticize what you see going on in your country, that it should be different, right? So if you are aggravated by, I don't know, ICE, access by ICE, and the current policies of the United States, by all means, I think it does make sense for you to jump right in and express your views. Now, for someone from another country, right, like where they are leaving a country that is clearly left oriented at this time, to go to the United States, which is right-wing oriented at this time, it does sound like a little bit conflicting to some extent, right? But yes, so just going back to the point, in general, even though many Brazilians badmouth the United States, I would say almost all of us would love to have the opportunity of living in the United States. And from this perspective, products coming from the United States, they have a plus. Even when they compare, let's say if you have two options to buy products like from the United States and from Europe, typically Brazilians are going to say, listen, of course, I'm going to prefer to have something coming from the United States. All right, Sean, but interesting point. Tora, if by any chance a retirement visa were to be denied, can we try again and reapply for the retirement visa? Tora, interesting question. And Brazil, and that's very typical of Brazil. It's not like the United States. Brazil typically does not penalize you when you are not successful for a certain visa or residency, okay? And we actually had cases in the past, like not because the client was unlucky or anything, but let's say if the client could not get the compliant papers on time to satisfy a request by the Brazilian immigration, they would, face a denial, and they would have no problem in applying again once the first round was completed, okay? So there is no prejudice when you are denied a visa or a residency, typically in Brazil, right? There are, of course, more extreme situations. Let's say Brazil has a very traditional view of, sex crimes and crimes against children. So if someone has, and I'm not talking about you for sure, right? I'm just talking about the dynamics of the non-prejudice in Brazil. But if someone has one of those issues like once identified through a certain immigration procedure, they're going to be typically recorded on your profile, and yes, they will probably cause a new rejection in the near future. But the rejection here is not because you didn't get the prior visa. The rejection here is because there is a very serious problem in your life, right? Not within the first process, if you will. All right, Tora, I hope that was helpful. General Principal, boa tarde, senhor Oliveira e amigos. I hope everyone is doing well. Glad to see you here, General Principal. James Rochas, do you think if Bolsonaro wins, it will have problems for gringos living in Brazil in general? Obrigado. James Rochas, absolutely not, right? Actually, the Bolsonaro family, they are extremely aligned with the United States, right? There is even the younger, I think is the younger son of President Bolsonaro. He's in the United States, and he works very closely, if I'm not mistaken, right? I don't really follow in details, but I think he's even aligned with the current Trump administration. So if anything, right, things would be even easier for foreign citizens. I can give you a very a practical example. Under President Bolsonaro, he created the waiver for U.S. citizens, Canadians, and Australians to enter Brazil visa-free. So that was his choice for the United States. Once he left power, once President Lula took over, it was a main desire of President Lula to enforce the so-called reciprocity, right? The concept here is that if Brazilians need to face long lines and a lot of pain to secure a visa to visit the United States, guess what? U.S. citizens should at least get a visa to enter Brazil, right? And, to be honest, President Lula was skillful in terms of how he enforced the visa requirement. Is an e-visa, so most U.S. citizens, they don't need to go to a consulate. Like, they can basically apply from a computer. The fee, I think it's super reasonable. I think it's $80.90, something like this. And, the threshold for you to secure is not really high, okay? So that's the distinction, general principle. Like President Lula, typically, right, like the President Lula and the left side of the aisle in Brazil, as expected, like they are antagonic to the United States. President Bolsonaro, right side, right? Like he's really aligned with the United States, but not only in terms of because President Trump is in power, but because there is like an ideological component, right? Like the right side of the aisle in Brazil, like typically they're going to look at the United States and think that this is like, an ideal to be pursued, okay? And the left side, I don't know, like they think more about China. They think more about, they have an attachment. And China, I think it's a good model, not for you to pursue necessarily as is, but of course for Brazil to develop a relationship with. But the problem with the, of the left is like they typically are gonna have like a support for people like Maduro, right? So President Lula was a supporter of Maduro, of other dictators in Latin America, a supporter of Cuba, right? And I think, like I would stick to China, which I think, is a very good partner from so many perspectives, right? And I've been to China, and I actually traveled to China, I think it was last year, and it was just surprising how developed China is nowadays, right? Like if you compare, at least when you look at the main cities in China, like I went to Shanghai, and it was just surprising, like the highways, they look better than typically what you see in the United States. Things look more modern, right? So it was such, like an accomplishment. And I think, Brazil is doing the right thing by pursuing closer connections. And this is going to be on President Lula's, ideology to strengthen the relationship with China, right? So kudos to Brazil and President Lula for noticing, right, this possibility of developing Brazil with relationships with China. But yes, general principle. So if anything, like if the Bolsonaros win the election, I think one of the first things they would do is like to avoid the decision from President Lula to enforce visa requirements to U.S. citizens, all right? And yes, and another, upside, and then it's not really, we're not talking about politics over here. We are talking more about, factual accomplishments. Like most of the current, if not all of the current immigration framework, it was launched under President Bolsonaro, right? So digital nomad, retirement visa, investment in Brazil real estate, all of those innovations, they came from President Bolsonaro. Now, what I like about President Lula is that, he actually kept all of those tracks functional, because unfortunately, in developing countries like Brazil, is very typical, not only in developing countries, right? Like, I think that President Trump did the same thing with many policies from President Biden. In Brazil, like, very typically, when you have a new president, like, he's going to undo so many things from the prior administration. And kudos to President Lula, who kept all of these programs that were actually created under President Bolsonaro. So there was a really nice transition from President Bolsonaro to President Lula. And I think, no matter who's going to win, if President Lula win, again, for the fourth time, guess what? He's going to continue doing what he's doing. If it is like Flávio Bolsonaro, right? For those of you who don't know, Flávio Bolsonaro is the son of former President Bolsonaro. If he wins, guess what? Things are going to continue as well, and maybe even expand to give foreign citizens even more access to Brazil. James Rochas, I am an Asian, not U.S. citizen, but I understand it. Thanks for the details, as always. Interesting, James Rochas. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I think that in terms of framework, Brazil would become more open, to different immigration routes. President Lula, he has been strong in family-based immigration. Okay, so President Lula is gonna be looking at family relationships, meaning like if you have a child in Brazil, if you marry a Brazilian, and also President Lula is big in terms of tracks, or he was, right. I'm going to explain this. Like, President Lula was really big in terms of asylum and refugees, okay? But because of the huge influx of refugees we have in Brazil over time, coming from Haiti, coming from Venezuela, coming from Bolivia, coming from other Latin American countries, there is nowadays a pushback, even by President Lula's administration, to reduce the number of people coming from, developing countries that are, maybe to some extent straining the public resources we have in Brazil. So if you follow the live stream, you may have seen our discussion about people applying. For instance, if you are applying from Pakistan, if you're applying from India, if you're applying from Indonesia, if you're applying from Vietnam, like if you apply from many of those countries, guess what? The Brazilian consulates, they are gonna typically deny an application even when you have a well-qualified applicant. Okay, and the reasoning here is that they think, listen, I'm sure that if this person has access to Brazil, they will never go back to their country. That's the mentality of the Brazilian consulate. So even if you are meeting the requirements, they are going to make this assumption, and they are going to typically deny an application. And listen, this is not written anywhere, and I'm sure that if you tell someone from the consulate, listen, this attorney is saying you guys have a policy of denying visas, they're going to say, well, this guy, he's crazy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, we are talking based on dozens of cases that we saw happening over time, and it is just clear that there is an unwritten policy by the current administration to avoid issuing visas in those countries. And again, I mean, it's difficult to blame the Brazilian administration, because guess what? If the consulate would give visas, to most applicants, Brazil would be probably unable to accommodate that many immigrants, if you will, right? Tough call, right? Like I mean, from one side, like I wish every country could accommodate as many refugees or asylum seekers as available, like, and on the other side, there is a real constraint in terms of the public services available. And that's a decision that, countries are making. I think Brazil is being mature. Brazil is keeping several doors open to asylum seekers, to refugees. But on the other side, is also trying to balance this in terms of keeping like a flow of immigration that's feasible given our public services capability, if you will. All right, let's see what else we have over here. And don't forget, if you're here with us, if you enjoy the live stream, don't forget to like our live stream. By doing so, you help our business and you help other people just like you to find this content. I appreciate the gesture. And let's take a look at something from our backlog. All right. So what about the work visa? Is it easy to obtain? Like, I mean, I have an engineering degree. Do you think someone would hire me, right? Like, so this is a question, an interesting question. And I would say in Brazil is often hard for you to find a sponsor. And just like in the United States and many other countries, like for you to secure a work visa, it's gonna be on the company, on the employer, to assure the government that you're gonna be first, you're gonna be paid in accordance with certain standards, and if something happens to you, guess what? The company is gonna be on the hook. So many times, and this is just like, a different perspective on the work visa, many times we're going to have, instead of the company, we're going to have like a prospective employee trying to book a consultation with us, and we're typically going to cancel the cancellation, and while very politely explaining that we are not a good match. And the reason for that is that many times, foreign citizens, they're going to say, you know what, like I have this friend of mine and they have like this small company. I'm going to have a deal with my friend. My friend is going to hire me using his company. And then, I'm going to pay for all the obligations that this hiring is causing to my friend. But what the foreign citizen doesn't understand is like how much trouble, the Brazilian employer can have down the line due to like the many labor obligations, right? So even if this a foreign citizen would actually pay for those things, let's say if this foreign citizen is unable to pay for those costs of employment anymore, there is no deal between those two persons that would overwrite all the obligations that were generated by the work visa, right? So in other words, even if you have an expectation that a small Brazilian employer would hire you, most of the time this never gets to fruition. The real opportunities are within like at least mid-sized companies and larger size companies. Sometimes you have a U.S. company with a subsidiary in Brazil, and maybe they need someone like you to do some type of bridge work between the Brazilian office and the United States office. Or like James, if James, like he's Asian, if he's, I don't know, like from a country in Asia, and there is a company from his country operating in Brazil, maybe this company would want to hire him to do a bridge between the Brazilian operations and the operations back in the headquarter country of such a company, right? So the work visa is not for everyone, and for those who are really creative in terms of trying to find a small employer, a friend who could help you with the work visa. Most of the time, this will not work, because once your friend gets to the point of pulling the trigger, he's probably going to be aware of all the risks that he's going to be running by giving you the work visa, and he's going to get cold feet. That's something we saw happening so many times, to the point that we no longer take those consultations. Like people, they typically come to our website and they book the consultation. When they book the consultation, they disclose like the topic of their interest, and then very politely and respectfully, we're going to say, listen, we are not the right match. We don't want to waste your money, because we would basically, be in this consultation and we would not provide you with the service. And therefore, we cancel the consultation, and naturally, we refund the person in full. James, I am a digital nomad living in Fortaleza now, though. Congrats, James. Fortaleza, my place of choice in Brazil. Moved here from London, but I am from a small Asian country. Appreciate your suggestions. Absolutely, James. And, I particularly like Fortaleza a lot. I typically stay in a city called Beberibe. Beberibe is like an hour away from Fortaleza. You basically drive to the east, right? Like you actually drive like to the southeast. Like Fortaleza, if you look at Fortaleza on the map, is more or less like this. And then, you're going to be going south, and you're going to be going to the east, okay? And that's Beberibe. Beberibe is a smaller city. It has a very decent infrastructure. It has, 4 large supermarkets, which is kind of rare by CRI standards, right? Like, in Fortaleza, you have everything. But once you leave Fortaleza, James, I think you know what I'm saying. And in Beberibe, you have nice gyms, which, by the way, is not standard like in smaller cities. You have a really good public administration under Prefeita Michele Queiroz. She's doing just an amazing job at the city, right? Like I remember when she took office, Beberibe was like, I don't know, it was stuck like in the old ages, and now we see so many good things being done over there, and it's just a pleasure, to be there and see all the development going on, while the city is still welcoming and comfortable, and with lots of natural beauty. James, let me know if you've been to Beberibe. Many times people don't know the area by the city's name. They may know by Morro Branco, right, or White Sands. Morro Branco is like the main beach in Beberibe, and then there is a second one, which is called Praia das Fontes, or the beach of the sources of light, if you will. There is also Uruaú. Uruaú is another blockbuster in Beberibe. And there are news. I don't know if they're going to materialize or not. I'm always skeptical of those news. But there is a Club Med or Mediterranee, which is like an international chain of super high luxury hotels. They are going to establish themselves in Uruaú. And they have a plan to spend up to R$1 billion, right? Like, so up to 200 million US dollars in Uruaú, in the area. So it's an area that is attracting a lot of attention because it is, in my opinion, as beautiful or as Fortaleza. But guess what? The price tags are still much more inviting. General principle, I know there are property managers for short-term stays, but do you know if it is common to have property managers for longer-term tenants if the owner is not local? General principle, for longer-term rent, many real estate agencies, they are going to perform this role, okay? Because it's much easier for a real estate agency to manage your property under a longer term tenant, right? So I would say, I think most real estate agencies, they would be interested in discussing this possibility with you, okay? Now, for short-term rental, that's when the friction, is maximum, and most real estate agencies would never entertain the possibility of helping with short-term. But for longer-term, my understanding is that is the opposite. Friction is going to be low because guess what? You're going to have the same person living over time. The real estate agency needs to make sure that they are paying rent on time. If there is some occasional need for maintenance, the real estate agents can kind of outsource that. So I would say you would be better off, general principle, maybe just hiring a regular real estate agency, okay? Because then they can handle both the rental, they can help you with the contract, and they can potentially take care of those occasional maintenance calls from the tenant. Aaron, what kind of lifetime do condos here have? Cambuí, in Campinas, lifetime. What do you mean by lifetime, Aaron? What kind of lifetime do condos here have? In Toronto, Canada, for instance, it's not uncommon for a condo building to fail and get turned down with 40, and they are not expected to go much past 6 years. With the harsh code, is Brazil better? That's a great question, Aaron. And honestly, what I have in terms of references, to share with you, it's going to be like Rio de Janeiro, where I think you can tell that's where we have most of our real estate transactions. And in Leblon, which is a place I know well, there are buildings, like from the 50s and the 60s, and they are just in great shape, right? So it's like, we're talking about a 70-year-old building, which is absolutely just fine. Now, also in Rio de Janeiro, not exactly in the south zone, but in other areas, particularly more inner country areas of Rio de Janeiro, there were cases of buildings who would collapse with just a few years, right? And to make things worse, collapse with people inside, right? So nowadays, after those cases of buildings collapsing, the public administration is much more active in terms of inspecting new developments. But it's difficult to have a typical timeline for buildings in Brazil, but it's not common. I can tell you for sure, it's not common in our mentality, Aaron, to envision something like you're saying, we're going to demolish a building and build something in the same place. Now, what happens is not because of the lifetime, or it's more about the gentrification of an area. For instance, like in São Paulo, there is a neighborhood I like a lot, is Liberi or Liberdade, which is recognized as the Japanese neighborhood, and it's closer to downtown, which I like, by the way. I like a lot São Paulo downtown, and Liberdade is just connected to downtown. And what is happening across Liberdade is that many places, they are being demolished to give place to a new building, but they are not being demolished because they are no longer viable from a construction perspective. They are being demolished because there is more opportunity to have a high-rise building in the same place where there was, I don't know, like a 5-floor or a 10-floor building. Now they are going to build something with 20 floors, with 30 floors, right? And those older buildings, they lack many conveniences that nowadays are more commonly requested by people visiting São Paulo. And that's something we discussed here not long ago. The new buildings, they have many conveniences, like they usually come with a gym, right? Like it's not like a full gym, but it's a reasonable gym. You're gonna have like, co-working areas, really comfortable co-working areas with good internet, with, good seats, good desks that people can use. They have like, community kitchens, fancy community kitchens, right? It's not like a community kitchen in the old sense. It's more like a fancy community kitchen, so you can cook a nice meal with other people from the building, to have some fun together. There are so many interesting things in those newer buildings. So that's when they typically decide to get rid of an older building. It's not exactly because of issues with the current construction. I have heard this question, particularly from people from Florida, Aaron. Like people from Florida, I know about the situation of some buildings that are basically not feasible to be sold, just because there is so much to be done in terms of infrastructure, of maintenance, that usually owners are upside down, right? Like, I mean, there is an assessment that they need to pay, I don't know, $200,000 to bring this building to code. And guess what? People don't want to pay $200,000 for that particular condo, and therefore they are unable to sell the condo. And maybe there is a lawsuit from the state trying to compel them to get up to code, and they don't have money. So this becomes like an even bigger problem, because now, in addition to a huge assessment, now you have a lawsuit that is going to scare away any prospective buyers. Now, there may be something like this in Brazil, but I don't know of. It's not typical in Brazil. All right, Aaron. So just sharing, but interesting question. That's a concern, particularly for people from Florida. Many people from the UK, they also have a problem with HOAs. It looks like in London, other cities like HOAs, they can get out of hand. And then there are, like legal disputes between tenants, and, like it becomes a whole ordeal. So people from the UK, they are typically also concerned. But now it's not about the construction. It's more about how the HOA is handling things. All right, James is saying, eu sei, Beberibe, muito bonito. All right, James, glad to hear you know Beberibe. Okay, let's see what else we have. General Principal, Aaron, I have lived inland most of my life. I did not realize how corrosive sea salt is until I started looking at properties on the coast in Brazil. The view is beautiful, but it comes at a cost. So true, General Principal. And to make a connection to James Rocha, right? Like, I mean, we are talking about Fortaleza, right? Coast of the northeast area of Brazil. And, when you have a property, like a beachfront property in that area, General Principal, is going to be much worse than a beachfront property in Rio de Janeiro. And the reason is like the winds that are going to be hitting Fortaleza, right? So Fortaleza is very famous for kite surfing. Like, there are droves of people coming from Europe to Fortaleza to practice kite surf. Guess why? Because winds, they are always there, and the winds, they are brutal. So what you see in the northeast coast of Brazil is going to be like, these winds bringing sand and basically, like just corroding everything that you can think of. Even like, there are special types of metal. I think inox or inox is one of them. And guess what? They don't last long in the Fortaleza, Sierra area, just because the winds, they are brutal. And again, those winds, they are going to bring sand. And it's basically like it's just like, I don't know, like a sandpaper constantly rubbing everything that you have by the beach. And it's really impressive. It corrodes not only metal, but anything that you can have. So it's going to corrode many times, concrete. When you have the concrete, you have, iron within a column. And somehow, this, corrosion is going to attack columns, from outside, from down, up. They are going to corrode, the concrete. They are going to corrode wood, right? Like they're going to corrode anything you can think of. So yes, that's a very big downside, I would guess. But for many people, right, buying a beachfront properties, like they're willing to pay the price. And yes, that's an interesting nuance to beachfront properties. All right, let's see what else we have. All right, and if you're interested in Fortaleza, right, maybe just to share here one more time about Remax Nomad States, like they do have good connections in Fortaleza and Beberibe, right? And I know they have a project in Beberibe. For those of you who would be interested in, living in the area or buying property over there. Okay, let's pick something else from our backlog. All right. Is it a good idea to marry to secure, permanent residency in Brazil? Marrying or getting into União Estável in Brazil is a very serious step. And we never recommend anyone to just marry or enter into a stable union just for the sake of, for the sake of immigration. For União Estável or stable union, right? There is a really high expectation from the Brazilian immigration, because there was a lot of fraud, or there has been traditionally fraud in stable union cases, and it's not uncommon. Let's say if you tell the Brazilian immigration that you live in a place and you don't actually live over there, they may start a criminal procedure for fraud. And that happened like last July of 2025. There was like an operation by the Brazilian Federal Police to dismantle some, crime rings that would like fake União Estável cases to secure permanent residency for foreign citizens. And guess what? Everybody was entangled in criminal prosecution. And I would say, a good thing that the Polícia Federal is chasing those things. Like we don't want to have, right? We don't want to have first, like Brazilian providers such as lawyers, notaries and other people participating in crime rings. And second, right, like if you come into Brazil to commit a crime, I guess you're not a good candidate for becoming a resident, okay? But yes, going back to the point, I would absolutely not recommend that someone, enters into a marriage just for the sake of securing residency. It looks like a bad deal to me. Getting into a marriage, whether in Brazil, the United States, Europe, Canada, any place, like to enter into a marriage or a stable union is something extremely serious. And I would not recommend you to do unless you are in love with the person. And in this case, it may make sense, right? But there is just like again anywhere else, a lot of potential trouble for whoever enters into a marriage, and then there is a breakup down the line. Typically, the Brazilian party is gonna chase the foreign citizen for support and other things. Not good. All right. We have Andrea, and that's going to be the last one for today, since we are arriving at the end of our live stream time. And Andrea, my husband will ask for his residency. Do you recommend he enters with a tourist visa and then start the residency process when we formally move to Brazil? I really appreciate your opinion. Andrea, there are many factors that are going to impact into such a decision, right? Like one of the main ones is whether you can get a visa. So yes, if you can get a visa to enter Brazil in the first place, that is very helpful for many people from many countries. Like they are unable to get a visa to enter Brazil. So that would be the first thing you need to check. The second one is going to be whether or not you and your husband, if you have like health insurance that has global coverage. If you have global coverage, then it would be an option for you to apply at a consulate. But if you don't have it, typically we like to apply while in Brazil, because when you apply in Brazil, guess what? You don't need health insurance. And of course, you can buy health insurance down the line. I'm not telling you not to have a health insurance. I'm just saying that if you don't have a health insurance, you may save a lot of money by applying directly in Brazil. And then once you get the RNM card, guess what? You can buy the same health insurance that I have, which is affordable and which is actually accepted at different health service providers, okay? But these are just two of the things, Andrea, that should be analyzed in your case. So, just like anything else in immigration, there are no single answers, right? Like, there is an absolutely best route. Like, the best route is going to depend on the specifics of your need. And there are two ways you can go about it. You can keep coming, to our live stream to participate and learning more about the distinctions, or you can also schedule a consultation. For us, either way would work. Like consultations, we like to provide it to people who are serious about their immigration journeys. If that's your case, you're welcome to, schedule one, or you are also welcome to attend our live streams and learn more about the journey. With this said, I want to thank you all for your participation today. Many interesting questions and participations and sharings. Remember that our next live stream is going to be now next Wednesday, right? And then, make sure to come to our channel, click on notify me. So when on Wednesday, May the 6th, we are here together again discussing all things related to Brazil. So with this said, I want to wish you all a blessed rest of your day and see you again on Wednesday.